Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So we left off at concentration and humility in prayer. And of course, this is a very important topic, but it's actually not the subject of this class. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about it, and then we're going to move on. If you want more details, you can take the class on spirituality, or you could take the class on, or you could read the book, the How to Pray book, inshallah, which explains it in more detail. So keep in mind that all the rules that we learn in prayer, it's not for you to only focus on the rules. And you think that, you know what, if I got all the rules down, my fingers are correct, and my fingers are spread when I'm grabbing my knees, or they're together when you grab your knees? Spread, okay. And what about when you're in prostration, sajda position? Spread or together? Together, right? So if you got all that down, you say, you know what, now I got my prayer down properly. There's a very important, in fact, the most important part of the prayer is the spirituality and the concentration in the prayer. So this is the form. If you got the form down, doesn't mean that you got the prayer down yet. You got the physical part of the prayer down. But this is actually the most important part of the prayer. So it's something we should never neglect, actually. So even if you perform everything physically, it's almost like, an example is like a fruit. The fruit, if you look at it on the outside, extremely clean, it looks ripe, everything is nice, and then you bite into it, it's completely rotten on the inside. Sometimes prayer can become exactly the same way. Outside is perfect. Someone videotaped you and they looked at every motion, you got everything 100%. Check, 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 finger spread, this, that, everything is done. All the words were said correctly. But there's no humility, no concentration in that prayer. So it's very important that we reflect and we keep in mind that the essence of prayer is actually the humility, the concentration, the spirituality in the prayer. In fact, so much so that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he used to emphasize this. So one time he saw a man, he was praying really fast. This is unfortunately a very common problem in our community, is that we pray really, really fast. People literally, they blast through everything. They're moving down so fast, up and down. He saw a person who was praying really fast, and when the person was about to leave the masjid, he stopped him. He said, you know what? Go back and pray because you didn't really pray. So the man went back over there and he prayed again, really super fast prayer. Came back, the Prophet said, no, no. Go back and pray again. You still have not prayed. So he went back and he prayed again really super fast the way that he knew how. He came back and then the Prophet explained to him. He said, look, you need to slow down. You need to have serenity in your movements. Don't rush so fast. And he also, one time he mentioned people who pray really, really fast. He says, like they're pecking units of prayer. Like, you know, a bird goes up and down really quickly. Just like you're pecking it. Like you're going. That's not the point of prayer. So it's very important we try to slow down. So here are a few tips that when you're praying, try to act upon some of these tips to help you increase your concentration and your presence during the prayer. So before the prayer, it's very important that you clear your mind from all other thoughts. And that's one of the things that, you know, make sure, you know, you mute everything that's going to distract you. And we talked about choosing the right location. We talked about choosing the right clothing that's not going to distract you, the right carpet that's not going to distract you, the right part of the room that's not going to distract you. And likewise, clear your mind from all the thoughts. So when you're doing so many things in the day and you're checking, if you're just reading your text message and then you start praying all of a sudden immediately, you're still going to be thinking about the conversation you were just having. So you need to just take a few moments to just kind of cool things down so that you can get your thoughts out. The second thing is, if you notice that your surroundings are distracting you, it's allowed for you to close your eyes. So it's something, sometimes people don't feel that they can't close their eyes. They get distracted by, you know, some people are doing something over there, and then someone is running around, there's a little kid, you know, playing around over here, and you get distracted. So you're allowed to close your eyes in order to help you concentrate. And of course, it's better to play in a place where there's no distractions in the first place. The third thing is that you should say every part of the prayer by actually moving your lips. So when you're actually doing the prayer, instead of when you're silent, instead of just saying in your mind, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, in your mind, you actually say it on your lips. You move your lips. Say Alhamdulillah. Even if you're not even letting much breath out, you just at least move your lips at minimum. Or if you hear yourself, if you just whisper just to yourself a little bit, it actually helps you to concentrate if that works for you. right? It can actually help you to concentrate, and it helps you to slow down. So it helps you to stay focused, and it forces you to slow down, because your mind can think faster than your lips can actually move. So when you you force yourself to move your lips, you automatically slow your prayer down. So you can't rush it, right? So otherwise, there are people, they start yawning, right? They're yawning, and they're still doing it. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And they're yawning, and they're still going in their mind. They're at the end of the surah by the time they finish yawning, because they kept on going while they're in the middle of yawn. If you're moving your lips, literally your yawn is a pause, right? If you start coughing, you pause because you can't recite anything. But if you're stuck in your mind, you're coughing and you're still finishing the entire surah. So this can be a big problem. So just try to, that's one other tip. Tip number 4 is understand the meaning of what you're saying in prayer. And that is, how do you do that? But at least you just read the translation of the Arabic phrases. At least understand what the prayer is saying. So just go to the translation of each part of the prayer and try and reflect upon it as much as you can. So while you're saying the Arabic, once you've memorized the Arabic, while you're saying the Arabic, you've already read the translation. And you've kind of associated some of the meanings, that this verse has this meaning, this verse has this meaning. So make those associations, and the more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it. And realistically, how long does it take to just one read through of all the things that you say in prayer? How long do you think it takes just to do one read through in English translation? What would you say? You know all the stuff that we say in prayer. We say Fatiha, we say Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, we say Allahu Akbar, we say Sami Allahu liman hamida, we say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, we say At-Tahiyyatu lillahi. If you were to take the English translation of all of those things we say in prayer, and you just read it one time, how many minutes do you think it would take? Less than 10 minutes, right? Less than 10 minutes. And unfortunately, there are Muslims, they've been praying for 50 years, and they didn't even bother to take 10 minutes to do one glance through and understand what they're saying. We should never fall into that trap. So one of the difficulties is that you say, well, where can I find the translation of all those things? And yeah, it's a lot of people used to ask me that. Say, where do I find it? So this is scattered over in different places and all of that. But now you have no excuse, because my book, How to Pray, has all of this stuff. So, and it's free, and it's on the internet. So it's there available for you. So you can at least read through it, 10 minutes one day, 10 minutes the second day. Let's say you do 10 read-throughs in 6 months. You will start associating the meaning very, very well, even if you don't understand a word of Arabic. Because you're going through the translation and you're going and associating, well, this verse I already have memorized is associated with this English meaning. And you're going to start making the association. Even if you just did one run-through a month, you would see a difference in your prayer, because you would understand what's going on. If I tell you, oh, you know what, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, it means praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. You say, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. That's not true. You say, okay, you at least know what is what and what is not what. If you say Rabbil Alam, if you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, oh, well, I think that means guide us to the straight path. No way. Because I've read, if you just read it 5 times, even 3 times, you'll know what is what and you'll know what is not what. So it makes a big difference. So try to reflect upon the meaning while you're saying every phrase, and try to put a little pause of reflection. So while you're reciting, say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, stop for a moment and say, what does that actually mean? What am I doing? Praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. What is that supposed to mean? And sometimes you're going to reflect upon a verse or a statement more based upon your own circumstances in life. So if you're thinking, you know, you've just done something really bad, and you're reciting the Quran in prayer, and you're saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you're not going to reflect so much on that. But then you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Allah is the compassionate and the merciful. You start reflecting on that more, because you're in need of mercy and compassion right now. So based upon your circumstance, you're going to be reflecting on different verses and different parts of the prayer, depending on, you know, your circumstance. So it's very important to reflect on the prayer itself. And number 6, whenever you say the takbir, whenever you say Allahu Akbar, in order to make a transition, you should realize what you're saying is Allah is the greatest, right? And actually, if you wanted to look at the literal translation, it means Allah is greater than, but there's no ending. The rest of the sentence is not complete. So you fill in the blank, and what it means is Allah is greater than what? It means it's greater than everything, But what happens is most people, a lot of people lose their focus when they're making the transition. So if they're really focusing, they're concentrating on Fatiha and they got everything going down really good, they concentrated well, and then they say Allahu Akbar, it's kind of, you let your guard down for a moment, you're like, yeah, I did it. And then all of a sudden you zone out and you go into bowing position because you thought you like made an accomplishment, which you did, but you made an accomplishment and then you let your guard down. So if you remember that Allahu Akbar means Allah is greater than, your mind starts wandering, the moment you hear Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater than that thing that you were thinking about. If you were thinking about what you're going to eat, Allah is greater than that meal. If you were thinking about your new car that you just bought, Allah is greater than your new car. And whatever GPS or whatever it has in there, Allah is greater than that. Every time you hear Allahu Akbar, think Allah is greater than the thing which was just distracting me away from prayer. So that can help you to focus in the prayer, inshallah. All right. So that's the concentration. Let's talk about some of the mistakes in prayer. So getting back to the law part of prayer. The mistakes in prayer, there are two types. There are major mistakes and there are minor mistakes in prayer. So the major mistakes is that if are not performed properly, the prayer will not count and the prayer has to be repeated. Because these are the fundamental parts of the prayer. They're the absolute essential parts of the prayer. You miss one of them, your prayer is not going to count. You need to stop your prayer. You need to repeat it one more time. Start again. So what are those? Number one, the intention. Having the intention for prayer. So that means that if you think you're praying Isha, completely praying the wrong prayer in the first place, your mind was just totally gone, you don't even know what you're praying, then you have to restart your prayer. Because you have to at least know what you're praying. Number two, beginning the prayer with the takbir. Alright? So if you're beginning your prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, when you're raising your hands, you're saying Allahu Akbar, that part is considered mandatory. So if you skip that, which is very rare that you're going to skip that, but if you skip, then your prayer is not going to be valid. So let's say you're joining late, and there's the imam, the leader of the prayer, he's leading the prayer, and all of a sudden you join, and you're so concerned about catching up to exactly where the people are, and they're already in prostration. So you go, and immediately you just go straight into prostration. You didn't start your prayer with Allahu Akbar. So the prayer is not going to be considered valid. So you have to make sure that you start with Allahu Akbar in the beginning. The standing for recitation. So when you're standing and you're going to be reciting some Quran, it's a necessity to stand, unless of course you have an illness, you're not able to stand up, or you're in an airplane space where it's very, very tight, you're not able to stand up. It's overlooked in those cases, right? Reciting some verses of the Quran is mandatory. Right? If you completely skip the Quran and you just say Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, and then all of a sudden your mind wanders and you say Allahu Akbar and you go into bowing and you skip reading Quran at all, you have to repeat the prayer. So that's another thing. So reciting Quran is mandatory. Bowing is mandatory. So if somehow all of a sudden you're praying, you finish Fatiha, you finish some surah, and then all of a sudden you say Allahu Akbar and you go all the way into prostration and you totally forgot and skipped the bowing, you missed one of the most important parts of prayer. You have to repeat the prayer. The intermediate standing, when you come back after the bowing position, the ruku' position, is also considered mandatory. Making sure you prostrate twice in every single unit is also considered mandatory. Right? So if sometimes let's say you were in sajda, you were in prostration, and you started saying Subhana Rabbiyal A'la 11 times. You're really trying to concentrate by yourself, and you totally forgot, and you thought you were in the second prostration. And then you got up and you realized, you know what, I was only in the first one. You have to prostrate twice in every unit. So if you skipped one, your prayer will not count. You got to restart the prayer again. Sitting in the final unit of prayer long enough to reach the declaration of faith. So meaning that you have to do the final sitting, which you can't really conclude the prayer without that. And moving the head to the right at least one time by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's minimum, the bare minimum for your prayer to be valid. Right? So you say, well, why in the world would you do one instead of two? We're supposed to do two. All right? Hypothetically, just imagine the scenario. You say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then you lose your wudu before you say the second one. So technically your prayer is valid, and you don't have to repeat your prayer, because you got the first one down, and the first one is what's mandatory. So these is what's mandatory. Now, if any of these essential acts are skipped during the prayer, let's say you skipped it completely and you only made one prostration, you made one sajda. So what do you do in that case? Well, if you're close, you should actually return back to that action when you remember. So if you remember now, all of a sudden, you know what, you didn't make the proper prostration, and you're standing up for the second unit of prayer, and then you're like, wait a minute, I only did one prostration. You go back down and you do the second prostration. Even though you were standing, you just go right back down from where you should have been. So that's one way. And the second way is you can add another prostration. If you're already quite far, you could add another prostration in the next unit, right? So that's a possibility as well. So if you finish your prayer and you realize you did not fulfill all of these, then your prayer is not valid and you need to repeat the prayer as soon as you realize. If you don't realize and you just completely don't remember, inshallah, hopefully Allah will not hold you accountable for that. But you should always try to ask Allah for forgiveness in whatever mistakes that you knowingly or unknowingly have made in the prayer. So these are the major mistakes such that your prayer is not going to be valid. Then there are minor mistakes. The minor mistakes are one of those mistakes which is not a requirement of prayer. So if you make this mistake, your prayer is still valid, but you can correct the prayer by adding 2 extra prostrations at the end. And I'm going to explain what that is. Right? And these 2 extra prostrations, what they'll do is they'll make up for the deficiencies in the prayer at the end. And it's actually going to humiliate your own ego, which actually distracted you in prayer. It's kind of like a punishment for yourself. I got distracted in prayer, I wasn't focusing properly. I'm going to add more worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in there at the end. So you add 2 more prostrations. So here are some of the common mistakes which require a person to perform these 2 additional prostrations. So one of them is delaying any one of the required acts of the prayer because they have to be done in the prescribed order. So if you delay one of these acts which we just talked about in the previous list, intention, you can't delay your intention, but standing, recitation of Quran, bowing, intermediate standing, prostrating twice. So let's say, like I said, you completely forgot and you prostrated once and then you got back up. When you go back down, you make your prostration and you made it up. So you hit 2 prostrations, but you didn't do it in the correct order. Because standing should come after the 2 prostrations, not before. So what you do is, your prayer is still valid, but you have to make up that mistake by adding 2 prostrations at the end of prayer. So that's one example. The second is forgetting to recite other verses of the Quran after Al-Fatiha. So you're in the beginning of prayer and you're reciting Al-Fatiha. After you're done with Al-Fatiha, you're in the 2nd unit of prayer. And for some reason, your mind was thinking you're in the 3rd unit of prayer, where you don't need to recite any surah or verses after Al-Fatiha. So you say Allahu Akbar and you go into bowing position. And then you start saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. And then you say, oh, wait a minute. I didn't recite the other verses of the Quran. So what am I supposed to do? So in that case, what do? You go ahead and you continue your prayer like normal. You don't go back. You continue your prayer, and at the end of the prayer, you're going to add these 2 extra prostrations in order to make up the thing that you skipped, because it's not an essential part of the prayer. Right? It's important, but it's not essential. So that's something that becomes kind of common. Does that ever happen to anybody? Okay, it's happened to all of us. All right. Forgetting the first sitting in a 3 or 4 unit prayer by standing up. So you're in a 3 unit prayer, and after your 2nd unit of prayer, what should you have done? You should have got up after the 2nd prostration and you should have been sitting, right? And you're going to say At-Tahiyyatu Lillah. But what did you do? Accidentally, you forgot where you were and you went and you stood up for the 3rd unit of prayer. And you didn't sit and you didn't do At-Tahiyyatu Lillah. So what do you do in that case? Well, in that case, if you already stood up and you're already up, then you keep standing and you continue your prayer and you make it up by adding the 2 prostrations at the end. If you're on your way up and you're getting up but you've not stood up all the way, you sit back down quickly because you've not stood up all the way. Okay? And you do your at-tahiyyat and all of that. Otherwise, you skip it completely. Why do you skip it? Because it's not an essential act of the prayer. And going in order is considered a priority over the at-tahiyat intermediate sitting, which you can make up by performing 2 prostrations. Okay, so this is another common mistake. Any happened to anyone before? Yeah. the same culprits. We're all in the same boat. Reciting aloud when you're supposed to be silent, or vice versa, when you're in a group prayer. So you're leading Zohar prayer and you become the Imam, you say Allahu Akbar, and you start saying Alhamdulillah. Oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? I should not be reciting out loud. So when you start reciting out loud, obviously, hopefully someone's going to correct you if you're doing that, or vice versa. So you're delaying, you're praying Maghrib and you go Allahu Akbar, and you're sitting there quietly and you're reciting the whole Fatiha, and you're in the next surah, and then all of a sudden people got they figured out that you're not just making a long dua in the beginning, right? They realize that you've totally forgot, so they correct you, and then you start reciting out loud. So you've delayed now because you totally forgot. So what you're going to do is you're going to add 2 prostrations at the end. Okay, reciting adding an extra act of prayer. Okay, if you add another act of prayer, so for example, you perform 3 prostrations in 1 unit because you thought that you only had done 1, but you actually did 2, so you add a 3rd one, or you do 2 bowings, for example. So you say Sami Allahu liman hamida, you get back up, and then you go Allahu Akbar, you go back into bowing ruku again because you totally forgot that you just made ruku. Somehow you zoned out. This is considered to be an extra act of prayer. You're going to make up for it by making 2 prostrations. Skipping one of the following essential acts of prayer. Okay, the first one was delaying them. This one is skipping. So if you skip one of these acts of prayer, so for example, raising the hands at the beginning of prayer. So we said saying the Allahu Akbar at the beginning of prayer is what's absolutely mandatory. But if you said Allahu Akbar and you forgot to raise your hands, you can make that up by performing 2 prostrations. Reciting Al-Fatiha. If you somehow recited a different surah, you still recited Quran, you just didn't recite Fatiha. Somehow you just skipped and you started reciting the last chapter of the Quran. That can be made up with 2 prostrations. Reciting a surah after Al-Fatiha in the 1st and 2nd unit of prayer. So you skip that. So we talked about that already. You skip that, you can make it up. Saying the takbir, so saying Allahu Akbar when you're transitioning from one action to another. That can also be made up with 2 prostrations. Saying the prescribed words during the intermediate standing. So saying Sami Allahu liman hamida, saying Rabbana lakal hamd. If you forget that too, you can make it up. Saying at-tahiyyat lillahi wa salatu wa tayyibat. Saying all of the stuff, saying all of the things when you're sitting can also be made up as well, because it's not a necessity. What's a necessity is sitting actually. So, but the actual, what you say is something you can actually make up with 2 prostrations. And if you stand up after the final prostration, what should you do? So you're praying a 4-unit prayer, you're praying Asr prayer, and you're almost done with prayer. You're just about to say salam, and you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna, and then all of a sudden you think for a moment, and you think for a moment that you're in the 2nd unit of prayer. So you say Allahu Akbar and you stand up. Now which unit of prayer are you in? Okay. Asr prayer, 4-unit prayer, you're at the end of it, you raise your finger, you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and then you say Allahu Akbar and you stand up. And you're about to start reciting Quran again. Which unit are you in now? You're in the 5th unit, and there is no 5th unit. So what do you do in this case? You immediately sit back down as soon as you remember. Okay, as soon as you remember, you sit back down. And like I said, if you see the Imam get up, this is the one time where you don't follow the Imam. You stay seated. And you start saying Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Hopefully that he's going to get the point. If he doesn't get the point, you still say seated, because you're not supposed to follow him in that mistake there. So you sit back down, and then you make the extra prostrations. If you conclude the prayer, right? You finish the prayer, you're done, and you realize that you had missed 1 or more units of prayer. You skipped them completely. And what do? You stand up immediately, and you perform the ones that you missed. And at the end of it, you add 2 prostrations. Okay, so you can do that as well. Immediately though, huh? You don't go and say, okay, I'm going to go eat lunch, then I'm going to come back, I'm going to make up that 1 unit. So you do it immediately. If you're unsure, okay, if you're not sure of how many units you've prayed so far, this is very common, very, very common. So you're thinking, did I pray 3 or did I pray 4 now? Am I in the second one or am I in the third one? This is such a common problem. If you're unsure how many units you prayed so far, and this forgetfulness rarely happens to you, right? If it rarely happens to you, you should stop your prayer and you should start again. Stop and start again. If this is something that doesn't happen to you, you repeat your prayer. If this is something that happens to you quite often, and what does quite often mean? I gave you some criteria. If it happens to you at least once a year, okay, if it happens at least once a year, then what you do is you go with what seems to be most probable. So you're thinking in your mind, did I pray 2 or did I pray 3? So you know what? I'm 80% sure that I've prayed 3, but I have 20% doubt. You go with what's more probable, which is the 80%, and you go ahead and you say, okay, no, it's got to be 3. I'm 80% sure it's good enough. I'm going to go with the 3. I assume I prayed 3 instead of 2. If you're quite sure that you prayed 4 units, so for example, if you're quite sure you prayed 4 units, but you think maybe I've only prayed 3, you assume you prayed 4 because you're pretty sure about that. So over 50%. Now, if you're 50-50, and you really cannot decide because you zoned out completely, which is a very common thing. You can't even figure out, is this the 3rd or the 4th? I have absolutely no idea. I'm trying to recall for a moment. I can't even recall back. I'm just blank. I don't know, 50-50. What do? You go with the lesser number and you add the 2 extra prostrations at the end. You go with the lesser number. So if you're debating, did I pray 3 or did I pray 4? You assume that you prayed 3 and you add another unit and you just keep on praying as if you're in the 3rd unit. Why? Because if you're debating between 3 and 4, only one of them is for sure that you did pray 3. It's not for sure that you prayed 4. But it's 100%, even if you had prayed 4, you at least prayed a minimum of 3. Right? So because what you do is you go with what's certain. Because you know you pray at least 3. Right? If you're debating between 3 and 4. If you're debating between 1 and 2, you go with 1. You assume you prayed 1, and you go ahead and you add another unit, assuming that you had only prayed 1. Okay? So that's the way that it works. And if you want more details on it, check out the books. I wrote an entire appendix on it. So it's Appendix 1. It talks about how you determine certainty and uncertainty and how you apply these principles. It doesn't only apply in prayer. It applies across the board. It applies in wudu. It applies in fasting. It applies in so many different cases. So you should take a look at Appendix 1, and it'll give you some general rules which will help you understand Islamic law in all other aspects. The next thing, so what are these 2 prostrations we're talking about? So how do you perform these 2 prostrations of forgetfulness? Well, first of all, it's necessary to perform them. It's not just optional. It's necessary to perform them at the end of the prayer. There is difference of opinion on this, but let's go with it's necessary if it's for a correctable mistake. So there are correctable mistakes that we just saw, and then there are those non-correctable mistakes, like you completely skip prostration in your prayer. That's something that you can't correct, right? Something that you have to restart your prayer. So there's 2 ways to perform this prostration. One way is that when you're in the prayer, right near the end of your prayer, right when you're about to finish your prayer, you finished your Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, you already raised your fingers, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. You're about to finish, right before you say salam, what you do is you say Allahu Akbar, and you go into prostration, just like you would normally do. You say the same thing you would normally say in prostration. You say Allahu Akbar, you sit, like you would in between 2 prostrations. You say Allahu Akbar, you go back into your second prostration again. You do the same thing, say Allahu Akbar, you sit back up, and you finish your prayer. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's it. So all you're doing is, right before you say the salam, right before you say Assalamu alaikum and move your head, you add 2 prostrations, 2 sajdas in there, and then you finish the rest of your prayer. So that's one way to do it. And that's probably the easy way to remember how to do it. Then there's a second way to do it. And the second way is, right when you're about to finish your prayer, instead of, before you say this, right when you're about to finish your prayer, you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah 1 time. to your right side. And then you say Allahu Akbar and you go into prostration. And you say Allahu Akbar, you get back up, you say Allahu Akbar again, you go down a second time. So what you're doing, the difference between this one and that one is that this one, you're going to say one salam and then do your 2 prostrations. But there's one more difference. And then when you get back up, you start from the beginning. And you start with At-Tahiyyatu Lillahi and you do the entire thing. And you do the Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah and you do Allahumma salli ala Muhammad again from the beginning. And then you finish your prayer with 2 salams. 2 methods of doing it. So there's 2 of it. There's actually a third way of doing it too, but we're not going to learn the third way. So there's just, know that there's more than one way. So if you see someone going and making 1 salam, and all of a sudden they go into prostration, you know that there's 2 different ways of doing it. So just keep that in mind. Okay. If you made more than 1 mistake in prayer, so you made 2 or 3 or 4 mistakes, you don't need to go and make 8 prostrations. So you make 2 mistakes, 3 mistakes, you still make only 1 set at the end. 2 prostrations at the end. And the reason why that is that you're doing it because you made a mistake in prayer, not because you made a specific number of mistakes in prayer. The fact that your prayer was a little bit defective, doesn't matter how many mistakes there are, they're all correctable mistakes. You only need to do this 1 time, 1 set at the end. If you forget to prostrate after making a mistake, you can still do that after the prayer is over. So let's say you even forgot to add the prostration, but you know you made a mistake. And then 5 minutes later, you realize, you know what? I totally forgot to do my 2 prostrations at the end. You can just go down on the floor and you can do 2 right there, and that's it. You just say your 2 extra prostration. If where is it? If the time for the prayer is over, so you made a mistake in your Zuhr prayer, and now the time for prayer has elapsed, and it's Asr time now, then you don't need to do these prostrations anymore. And they're just, it's over. Right? So don't worry about it. You ask Allah for forgiveness and be more careful next time. Okay. Next section. Missing and making up prayer. Well, missing prayer and making up prayer. Oh. So it's really important. Being lazy in observing your prayer on time actually reflects your attitude to Allah. It reflects how seriously you take Islam. So obviously, you know, some people when they start out, you need time to build yourself. But once you had a sufficient amount of time, you should try not to be lazy when it comes to praying on time. And you know, this is something which can afflict a lot of people. So that they just get, you know, every other priority in their life becomes more important than the prayer. And we should make sure that prayer is a #1 priority. We should not delay it. We should not say, oh, I'll wait till the end of time. And then sometimes it's, you know, I'll just pray it late or something like that. This is not a good habit to have. So you should try to never miss a single prayer ever. But naturally you will miss some prayers. So when you do miss one, what should you do? You should make up that prayer with the feeling of regret, obviously with some remorse, as soon as you're able to do so. It's very important, as soon as you're able to do so. So if you sleep through Fajr prayer, which is one of the most common prayers to miss, what do? As soon as you wake up, before you eat your breakfast, before you know, do all the, you know, before you check your emails and everything, you should make wudu and you should pray that prayer. You should not say, oh, well, you know, I can pray before I sleep at night or something like that. You should not delay that much. You should pray as soon as you get an opportunity. If you're in the middle of something, that's different. You're literally late to an appointment, okay, you can delay a little bit. Go to your appointment quickly. Once your appointment is done, go make your wudu and you can make up your prayer. But if you have nothing else to do and you're just chilling out, I'll watch a little TV, I'll check my email or something, and you missed the prayer that morning, you should make it up as soon as possible. So all missed prayers should be made up immediately and with some feeling of regret. If you forgot about a prayer completely, so when you miss a prayer like this, you know, you're held responsible if it's your fault. So if it's your fault, you got so busy and you neglected and you forgot to set your alarm and you said, oh, I'm going to pray later, and then you forgot, right? And you should have been more careful. You're going to be held responsible for delaying. If you totally forgot a prayer or you slept through a prayer but it wasn't in your control, right? You didn't really have control, like literally you were so tired and your alarm failed. You couldn't get up. You're not going to be held responsible for that. So you're not going to be held responsible or accountable for missing that prayer. But you need to make sure you try to prevent it from happening again in the future. So what do? If you are bad with alarms and the alarm doesn't wake you up for Fajr, what do? Try second alarm. If it doesn't work, you try third alarm. If it doesn't work, you get one of those alarm clocks where when it goes off, it shoots a little helicopter out, and you have to find that little helicopter in your room which is flown somewhere, and you have to actually put it in the clock, otherwise it won't turn off. Or you can get the alarm clock like I have. I don't use it, but I have it. It has actually a gun, and you have to shoot the target that pops up in order for the alarm to turn off. Or you get your next door neighbor to bang on your door. Or you get your mom and dad or your wife or someone to throw water on your face. You figure out something. You know those, what's it called, Rube Goldberg? Anyone know the Rube Goldberg thing? He makes these little funny contraptions where like this little lever pushes this and a little ball rolls and then this thing moves around and all that. You make whatever you want to make. Something's got to happen where you got to wake up somehow. So it's your responsibility to figure out what can work. But you say, well, you know, I'm kind of a deep sleeper. If you had a job interview that day, you'd figure out a way to wake up. If you had a final exam, which you're going to fail your bachelor's degree, right, and you have to be there at the final exam, you'd figure out a way to wake up. If you had a court case, you had traffic school, you had to be in a court of law, otherwise you're going to be put in jail, you would figure out a way to wake up. Prayer is more important than that. So you figure out some way to make sure that you wake up, or to make sure that you don't forget. If you had a really, really important meeting, the most important meeting of your life, you would never forget that meeting. And this is more important than the meeting with any human being. So figure out how you can do it, inshallah. And if you need tips, you can ask people who have the experience on tips, where to buy these, you know, target practice alarm clocks and all of that stuff. Amazon has actually a lot of these different type of alarm clocks. There's a ton of them. And there's the ones you have to solve puzzles. You have to like actually do math problems or solve a puzzle in order for the alarm to turn off, because it wakes up your mind then, right? Some people say that, you know what, you should, as soon as you wake up a little bit, you should drink some water. It helps your body get up, so your mind starts getting up. And there's so many other things you can do, you know. So try and cooperate with one another in the household especially. So if it needs to be, you throw the water, and you're going to be really mad at them for the first 15 minutes. But afterwards, you're going to calm down, realize, alhamdulillah, at least I prayed my Fajr on time, it's good. So figure that out. If you realize that your prayer was invalid due to some reason, for example, you didn't have wudu, you also need to make up your prayer. So this is called make-up prayer. So if you miss your prayer, you have to make it up as soon as you remember. If you realize you didn't have wudu, or you lost your prayer was not valid for whatever reason, you need to also make up that prayer. You're just doing this. It's called a make-up prayer. And remember, this only applies when you're certain about it. You're certain that you didn't have your wudu or something. It should not be based on doubts. So some people really become obsessive compulsive about this, and they start thinking, well, I think maybe I felt something, maybe I lost my wudu, I'm going to repeat it again. And then again they go and pray, and I think, you know, I have a feeling maybe my wudu was not properly intact, so I'm going to go pray again. Some people, actually, you'd be surprised, more than just some people fall into this trap. So this should not be based on just doubts. But if you're sure, you're pretty sure that you lost your wudu or whatever it is, you need to repeat your prayer. So see Appendix 1 again for doubt and certainty issues. It's very, very important appendix to check out. Okay, so it's actually recommended to make the adhan and make the iqamah for a missed prayer as well. Okay, so that is recommended. However, if you missed more than one prayer, then you only need to make one adhan. And you make iqamah for the rest of them. It's recommended for the missed prayers. The prayers must be made up in order that you've missed, unless you missed more than 5 prayers. So if you missed, let's say you missed Zuhr prayer and Asr prayer, and now it's Maghrib time, you make sure to make them up in order. Right, so that's important. Okay, yeah. So make them up in order. Don't pray Asr first, then Zuhr, obviously. Unless you miss more than 5 prayers. You miss more than 5 prayers, you can't even remember. You missed like a whole week of prayer, for example. You're trying to make up all of it. Then you don't have to go in order, Fajr, and then Zuhr, and then Asr, then Maghrib, then again Fajr of day 2, and then Fajr. So you don't have to do it in that case. it's recommended to pray in order if you can remember, but if you can't remember, that's fine. You try and specify the missed prayers as much as possible. And keep in mind, there's another issue. Actually, I should have added this into the book. So when you're making a prayer, let's say you missed the Asr prayer, and now it's Maghrib time. So you should always try to pray in order. So you should pray the Asr and make up your Asr before you pray the Maghrib prayer, with one exception. And that is, if you happen to see a group of people start praying, and there's not going to be a second group of people praying afterwards, then it's better to join the group and then make up your prayer afterwards, because you're going to miss the group. So catching the group is more important in this case. Okay. Someone who's been raised in a non-practicing Muslim family, or been raised in a society such that they were not taught how to pray properly, or they were not really told about the importance and the necessity of prayer, doesn't need to make up for all those years of missed prayers that they've skipped, but instead they should just ask Allah for forgiveness. So there's two opinions among scholars here. One of them is you literally have to make up for all those missed prayers. So if you were born in a Muslim family and you prayed for like a little while, then you stopped 10 years, and then all of a sudden you decide, okay, I'm coming back to Islam, I'm gonna do it now. You have to make up 10 years worth of prayers. So that's one opinion. And the second opinion is that you don't need to make it up, especially if you didn't really realize the significance of prayer. You were never really taught properly, because unfortunately in many parts of the Muslim world, they're taught that prayer is like a good thing. It's nice if you do it, but if you don't, you don't. It's not a problem. There's many parts of the world, unfortunately, many parts of the world that have really neglected prayer. Has anyone witnessed? Have anyone met people like that? Many have, right? And we're talking about, it's not just one region, right? I used to think it's only like India, Pakistan, or something like that. It's not. It's literally same problem in Malaysia, same problem in Egypt, same problem in Africa, it's scattered throughout the entire world, unfortunately. So there are just certain, people who kind of, they're obviously they're Muslim, and they come. Friday prayer is like clear cut for everyone. You never miss a Friday prayer, but they don't realize that the Friday prayer, attending the Friday prayer and the other prayers are on the same level, that you got to pray no matter what. It's not just the Friday prayer that you have to pray. So that's something that you should keep in mind. So if someone was raised like that, and now all of a sudden they have to start making up 10 years of prayer as soon as they decide, why do I really have to be accountable for that? Now if someone intentionally went away, so I don't want to practice Islam anymore, and they go away for 3 months and then they come back, kind of as a penalty, if they make up the 3 months, it's better for them, because they already knew the importance of prayer. They knew what they were doing. They were intentionally being rebellious and all of that. So if they make up the prayer, that'll be good for them. Otherwise, they ask Allah for forgiveness, and inshallah He'll forgive. Okay. Let's start with Jummah prayer, and then we'll take a break soon, inshallah. So Friday is the Jummah prayer. The importance of praying in a group, we already talked about the importance of praying in a group. Whenever you can, it's important, should be done. But there's always going to be some times throughout the week where people are going to be occupied, and they cannot make it to the mosque, they cannot make it in a group at the same time. So if you think about it, someone in some community is always going to be missing at least a prayer here, a prayer there in a group, because of their job, because of their occupation, because of something. So the Friday prayer, the Jummah prayer, is something to serve two purposes. One, to get all the Muslims together in one prayer, in one locality at the exact same time. So why they take off time from work, they put down, all their other tasks that they're doing, they can stop all of that, and they can make sure that they're coming for the Friday prayer. It also serves as a time where people gather together not only to pray, but they gather together to socialize a little bit. So there is a socialization aspect in the Friday prayer. Unfortunately, we don't get to enjoy the socialization aspect as much, because Friday is not a holiday in America. Some parts of the Muslim world, it is a holiday. Like in Pakistan, it's holiday, right? Is it a holiday? Or?
I don't know. They had one time they did have Fridays and holiday.
Not anymore. Yeah, so like maybe Arabia is a holiday on Friday, right? So for most people, yeah. Jordan, Jordan, this is like kind of like a holiday as well. So there are quite a few countries out there that they kind of have like a half day or something, or at least like 3 or 4 hours is a holiday, you know, for that time on Friday. So every Muslim can go and, you know, take their time, and they can socialize, and they can have some lunch afterwards, and they can do this, they can do that. So that's something that unfortunately it's tough in America, because you literally got to leave work, go, and you literally got to come right back to work. So you miss the socialization part, which is part of the day actually. It's actually part of that. So people should be meeting each other. They're going to find out who's sick in the community, who's in need of something, and they're going to be praying together at the same time. Now Friday is considered the best day of the week for Muslims, and it's a distinguishing mark for Muslims. Because you have, for example, the Jews, they observe Saturday, the Sabbath. So that's a distinguishing mark for them. The Christians observe Sunday, right? Which is why Saturday and Sunday is a holiday in America. They have this Judeo-Christian tradition. So, or whatever other reason they have. So it's also a time to be reminded about your duties as a Muslim, and to be conscious of Allah by listening to sermons. So it's a time for education as well. You listen to the sermon, you get reminded about Allah, you maybe learn something new, you remember to renew your commitment to Islam, something that we need on a regular basis, we need on a daily basis, but this is like the minimum on a weekly basis. If you got so busy one week, you at least get something in the week, some kind of reminder that you need for yourself. So who must attend? Who is absolutely mandated to attend? It's all adult males. So all adult males must attend the Friday prayer. They don't have any excuse. The only excuse they will have is if they're traveling, if they're sick, or they're going to encounter some severe difficulty if they had to attend the prayer. There's only 3 excuses. So if someone's not traveling and they're not sick and they're not encountering some severe difficulty, they should not be missing. So what does that mean? That means that actually if high school youth can take time off on Friday, it's better for them, because they, as long as they're not going to get kicked out of school, or the school will allow it or something, they should take time off. College students, on the other hand, generally don't have much of an excuse. But I have a footnote here, which I think is it? Yes. So first of all, if you're sick, right, or you're traveling, or you have some emergency thing going on, what do you do if you can't make it to the masjid to pray Jummah? You pray your Zuhr prayer instead, because the Jummah is a substitute for Zuhr prayer. So when it's time for Jummah, you're not going to pray Zuhr that day. You're just going to pray Jummah prayer. But if you can't make it for Jummah prayer, you're going to pray Zuhr prayer as 4 units like you normally would. Now, what is considered to be a major difficulty? If there's snow, right, and it's heavy snow, such that it's very difficult to even get to where you're trying to go, or it's really, really heavy rain, right, and it's kind of dangerous on the roads, it's slippery. Not like the light rain we get in California, but like a heavy rain, and it's actually going to be a problem. Then that's an excuse, especially if you're in like a village where it's very muddy and you have to walk or something like that. We generally don't have that problem here, at least where we live. Very few people have that problem, but if in case there's a major storm or something, you don't have to attend the Jummah, and you can stay at home and you can pray the Zuhr prayer. So you don't have to put yourself in danger or something like that. The second is when it's a student at school or something like that, a student who has, let's say, a class, right? First of all, they should try not to take classes at that time. But second of all, if they have a class, what they can do is that day they can ask the professor, hey, can I just record your class with the MP3 player and I can listen to it later on? Usually they can skip out on the prayer even if they have to. Let's say they have an final exam scheduled that day. They can also go and they can ask their professor that you can delay it or something. Let's say there's an employee and there's an urgent meeting that, you know, there's a meeting every Friday and they need to attend that meeting. They should have some courage and ask, first of all, if they can change that meeting time or something. But if it's an urgent meeting and they're going to lose their job, you go to a school and your teacher is discriminating against you, or he just doesn't like you, or doesn't want to change the policy, says, no, I don't care. If you don't come on Friday for your final exam, you're going to fail your entire class. Then obviously that's going to make life very difficult for you. So you can be excused and you can go ahead and pray Zuhr in that case. But remember, you got to try your best to try and figure out a way around it. So I'm mentioning that in detail because some students and some employees, they get a little bit lazy. So, oh, I don't feel comfortable asking my boss. Why not? You have a right in California to do something for your religious practice. So you should at least ask. You're not likely to get fired. And even if you do, by the way, you can always get reinstated. So in fact, I had a friend of mine, he worked for, interestingly, the Irvine company. And it was actually partly his mistake, because he got hired at the company and he didn't tell them before he got hired that he would like to have, he didn't even tell them in the week that he would like to have Friday off until Friday comes. And then on Friday, so it's his mistake, on Friday, he tells them, you know what, I'm going to be taking off from this time to this time, extended lunch break for religious reasons. So you can't do that. We have a very important company meeting. He said, well, it's my religious obligation. I have to do it. So well, couldn't you have let us know in advance? Well, you know, I'm letting you know now. I got to go. So can't you start from next week? No, I have to go now. I said, okay, fine. If you go, you're fired then. And he went. So alhamdulillah, he went. I mean, he has the care for Islam, but he went and he got fired. So what happened? He went to civil rights, Muslim civil rights group, and they fought for his case, and he won after 2 weeks, and he was reinstated, and they had to pay him for the previous 2 weeks as well. So it's true that they should allow him to take that time off. Of course, he should have been a little bit smarter, but it means that you have some rights. If this guy could win this case, my point is, if you do things the right way, you'll be okay generally as well. So just keep that in mind. So Friday prayer. What are the conditions? The timing of Friday prayer is exactly the same time as the Zuhr prayer. And it should be prayed, it must be prayed within this time frame. Now there is some difference of opinion regarding the time frame. Okay, there are some scholars who say it could be a little bit before this or even a little bit after this. So like in our masjid, for example, because we have 2 Jummahs, we're actually taking that other opinion, which is not the opinion that you're learning in this class. So if you learn in this class, all of a sudden, it has to be in the Zohar prayer, and then you come at 12:30 for Jummah this Friday, and you say, oh, what the heck is going on here? You guys are teaching this and doing this. There is another opinion, so just keep that in mind. Okay? In order to have a Friday prayer, so it has to be in the right time. So you're not going to pray at Fajr time. You're not going to pray at Maghrib time. That's absolutely not allowed. But generally it has to be in Zohar time, or there's some opinion where you could pray before, you could pray a little bit after. In order for Friday prayer, you have to have at least 3 people present. And that includes the Imam, so at least 3 people. So you can't, if you have you and your friend or somewhere, and you're at college and you say, look, we can pray outside of our class, you give the khutbah and I'm going to listen to you. And trust me, I'm going to pay really good attention because I'm the only listener. Right? You can't do that because you have to have a minimum of 3 people. So you can go ahead and do the prayer if you have 3 people. Where can you pray this Friday prayer? You can pray in any mosque, any building, even any open area. So you can pray anywhere. Just like you can pray a normal prayer, it doesn't have to be in a specific area or a specific masjid. That's a common misconception. It doesn't have to be. So how do you conduct the Friday prayer? So you should select an imam, obviously. Just like group prayer, you select an imam. So here you select an imam as well. The imam is going to be delivering 2 sermons, and he's going to be leading the prayers. So this is how they're supposed to do it. So you choose the right person. The first adhan is called at least a few minutes before the sermon begins. So what happens is, few minutes, kind of like you would normally do for Zohar time, you call the adhan for the time of the prayer. So since the Jummah prayer is the Zohar time prayer as well, according to most of the opinions, then you make the call for prayer during that time. Then the imam, afterwards, when he's ready to start, he's going to stand up, he's going to face the congregation, he's going to face the people, and he's going to greet them, saying Assalamu alaikum, and then he's going to sit down. So he just gets up, greets them, sits back down, and then someone will start calling the call to prayer near the imam. So somewhere he's going to be standing near the imam, he's going to make the second call to prayer. Okay, so there's a first call to prayer in the Jummah, and then there's a second one as well. So he makes a second call to prayer, he calls the adhan the second time, and then the imam is already sitting down, he's ready to start, he stands up, and he starts delivering the first sermon. So the first sermon is delivered by praising Allah, by saying Alhamdulillah, or Ashukru Lillah, or any type of wording that's praising Allah, and praying for the Prophet. And it has to be done in Arabic. So you can say Alhamdulillah, you can say As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulillah, You just sent peace and blessings upon the Prophet. Or you can say it in a different way. As long as it's that part is in Arabic, and you just praise Allah in any way, however long or short it is, and you send peace and salutations on the Prophet, that's sufficient. The rest of the sermon can be in the local language, and it should include some type of admonition to people and reminding them to be devout, dedicated, sincere Muslims. So that's it. You just have to make sure that the rest of it has some message for the people that's going to benefit them and remind them about Allah and remind them about it being a good Muslim. So that's the first sermon. When the first sermon is complete, the Imam will sit down for a moment, and the time he should be sitting down is about the same time where you would be sitting between two prostrations when you're praying. So that's about the length. And then he gets back up, no takbir, no Allahu Akbar, nothing. He just stands back up and he starts delivering the second sermon. The second sermon has to be like the first sermon. You have to praise Allah again. You have to send peace upon the Prophet. And you can keep on adding more admonition. You can give another lecture. And it's recommended that you follow it with a general supplication, like a supplication, a dua for the believers, and help the people who are sick, or help us, or whatever it is, any type of supplication. Once the second sermon is finished, the Imam will give a signal that the prayer is about to start. The sermons are done, the prayer is about to start. And you'll see that the Imam usually says at the end, Aqimus Salah. So Aqimus Salah means stand up for prayer. Let's get the prayer started. So once that's ready, then the person who is giving the adhan is going to call the iqamah, and they're going to say the iqamah, the Allahu Akbar, the fast, right before the prayer is going to start. And the Imam leads the people in a 2-unit prayer. And this 2-unit prayer is actually going to be out loud. Even though it's daytime and it's like Zohar time, it's going to be 2 units, but it's going to be out loud, so it's going to be very similar, exactly like which prayer of the 5 prayers? Fajr prayer. 2 units, out loud, Fajr prayer. Right? And it's recited out loud like Fajr because of the large amount of people. We talked a little bit about the reasoning behind it, potential reasoning. And this suffices for the Zohar prayer. So whoever joined the Imam before he completed the entire prayer does not need to pray the Zohar prayer. So if you come late to the prayer, you come late to Jummah, you miss everything, and the Imam is about to finish the prayer, he's about to say salam, and you start your prayer. You join him, Allahu Akbar, and you join and you sit down. You caught the prayer, you go ahead, and what are you going to do? Once he finishes the prayer, he says, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, what do you got to do? You stand up, right? And how many units are you going to make up? 2 units, exactly. If you were the guy who came after that guy, and the Imam said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to start now. You say, Allahu Akbar. You can't join him anymore. You missed the prayer. What do you got to pray? You pray Zohar prayer, 4, because you missed the Jummah prayer already. So you got to pray 4, and a Zohar prayer, the intention is Zohar prayer. You missed the Jummah prayer completely. That's why it's very important to take into consideration traffic, take into consideration our parking lot size, or your masjid's parking lot size, or whatever it is. Take all of that stuff into consideration when you're trying to come. And you should not be that late anyways to Jummah. Some people have become into the habit, they just come for the prayer of Jummah. But Jummah is not just the prayer. Jummah is the sermons and the prayer as well. So you should be there beforehand, and there's a lot of blessings of attending. And of course, it's for your own benefit too. So when it comes to delivering the sermons, there's a lot of flexibility in how you deliver the sermons. Right? The only requirements are you have to have words praising Allah and praying for the Prophet. That's the only real requirements of the sermon. And it's recommended that the Imam does not make the sermons too long, since there might be people who have things to do and appointments and all of that stuff. So that's something recommended. What is the etiquette of the Friday prayer? So it's recommended on Friday, highly recommended, by the way, not just recommended, but highly recommended, to take a bath on Friday, to make a ghusl, to take a shower or a bath or something before you come and attend the Friday prayer. It's also recommended, highly recommended, to not eat any garlic or any onions or anything else which is going to emit like a strong odor, because people are going to be around you, they're going to be disturbed by this. So you should try not to eat onions or garlic, especially on a Friday before coming for prayer, because it's people are gonna, because even if you brush your teeth and all that, these are the two things where the breath still, you can still smell it. And on this note, you have to keep in mind that smoking cigarettes is actually prohibited in Islam. So cigarettes, you would say that, the odor is even worse. Not only does it smell bad, but it actually harms someone and causes cancer to the person who's going to be smelling, even if you smoked 2 hours ago. It's on your jacket. It's called third-hand smoking. It causes cancer to the person who's next to you as well. It's been proven now recently. So it's very important we realize that we shouldn't be smoking either, which goes without saying, but smoking is actually prohibited in Islam according to the severe health effects that it has. But if a Muslim decides to smoke anyways, he says, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyways, they should never allow that to affect the other people who are coming to the masjid and be harmed by that third-hand smoke. So if you're going to do it anyways, make sure that you never do that before Friday prayer or when you're coming to the masjid, because people are going to be bothered by that and it's going to disturb them. Okay? Before you arrive at the masjid, it's also recommended to brush your teeth for the same reason. Highly recommended to brush your teeth, and also recommended to wear perfume that day. So to put on nice cologne, scent, or something like that, perfume. Friday is also a very good day to cut your nails and to remove unwanted body hair, which we're going to cover in Islamic Law 102 class. We cover that. Probably next year I'm going to change that chapter and put it into the 101 class. But for now, you're going to have to wait. So we actually have to, as a Muslim, we're supposed to be cutting our nails. Let me just give you a quick hint. You're supposed to be cutting your nails and removing unwanted body hair, which is the underarm hair and the pubic hair. For males and females both. You should be doing it. It's recommended to remove it every week. And if you can't, you should never let it grow more than 40 days. And this is directly from the Prophet. 40 days is the maximum. So your toenails, your fingernails, your underarm hair, and your pubic hair should be trimmed, or like trimmed very, very small, or cut and shaved off completely, at least minimum every 40 days. And that's why Friday is a very good time to do it if you're going to do it on a regular basis. So it's recommended to do that as well, especially the nails. And that's for cleanliness reasons, because the dirt gets caught up in the nails. Toenails, same thing, and the bacteria and stuff collects under the underarm hair and the pubic hair and everything. So it's very important that we follow these practices in Islam as well, and that's mandatory. So if you exceed 40 days, it's sinful. So never exceed 40 days. Let's see. Okay. No one is allowed to talk during the sermon. So while the sermon is going on, no one is allowed to talk, and it is sinful to talk while the Jummah sermon is going on. Right? So this is very, very important, because so everyone can concentrate. That's why it's been established that way. So you should be very cautious about this. Someone comes and even says salam to you, you're not obligated to respond to their salam, even though normally you are. Somebody comes, say, hey, how are you doing? Don't respond to them. You keep on focusing on the sermon. So it's that serious of a thing, right? So those people who are that, obviously, if you're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to be like chatting on your cell phone either, right? Or whatever it may be. So it's very, very important you listen to the sermon. Now, some people will say, well, what if the sermon is boring or something? Well, you know what? This is your test in patience for the week, and you can complain to the administration and say, you know what, we need something, we need a person, an imam who's going to give a sermon which is, much better. So you can go ahead and you can do that. And this is mainly for the online people, because at Masjid Umar Farooq we of course have awesome sermons, right? Hopefully, inshallah. So you could do that as well, because that's a common complaint. So, well, I don't want to be quiet because it's so boring, and I don't like to come early because this and that and that. Okay, you know what? Very simple solution. You say, well, there's no other imams in the community who can give a good sermon. It's a very simple solution. Join the College of Islamic Studies, get your AA degree in Islamic Studies, and then we'll actually teach you in the last class how to publicly speak. You can go ahead and give the sermon. It's for all the online people. as well as you guys too. So, alhamdulillah. So it's problem solved. All right. So there's always be proactive. So no one's allowed to talk during the sermon. If you see someone else talking, you still shouldn't say, "Hey, you, be quiet. You're not supposed to be talking," because that counts as talking. You're not allowed to say that either. So what should you do? But you're allowed to gesture to them. So if you see someone talking or something, you can just give them a little gesture or something like that. In fact, Abdullah ibn Umar, one of the companions of the Prophet, one time he saw someone talking during the sermon, and he knows that he's not supposed to talk. So he took they were outside praying. So he took some of these little pebbles and he started throwing rocks at the guy. So maybe you don't have to do that, but you can do something. So you could actually, even though you can't talk, it doesn't mean that you sit there and the guy is talking and you're getting annoyed, why is this person talking? But I can't say anything to them. If I could say something, I would tell you to be quiet, but I can't. It doesn't mean you can't gesture. You can gesture. You can be like, and the guy's like, what? Just, what's going on? You can't talk to them, but you can gesture them, okay? You see, so it's not allowed for anyone to conduct business transactions during the sermon time, during the khutbah, during the Jummah time. When the Jummah is going on, you're not allowed to conduct business. So if you're supposed to be praying that Jummah, let's say you only have one Jummah prayer, one sermon or one Jummah prayer in your masjid, no one should be standing outside who's supposed to be inside, and they're going to be selling some books or selling some food or something like that. Everyone's got to be inside. So it's very, very important, and that's directly based on the Quran. Allah says that you leave off your trade and your selling and you go for the Friday prayer. It's recommended to pray 4 units after the Friday prayer, or it's also 2 units. So you could pray either 2 units or 4 units after the Friday prayer, which is considered recommended when it's done. Any number of units can be prayed before the sermon begins. You could pray 2, or you can pray 4, or you could pray whatever. However, once the Imam begins the sermon, once the sermon has started, it's actually disliked to start praying. Okay, now this is obviously the difference of opinion. So there are some scholars who have said, Imam Shafi'i is one of the scholars who says, if you walk in late for the prayer, you should start praying anyways. So you walk in, the sermon is going on, you say Allahu Akbar, and you start doing 2 units of prayer in order to greet the masjid, which is called the greeting the masjid prayer. So when you walk into a masjid, it's recommended you pray 2 units of prayer for the first time you walk in. So Imam Shafi'i, he said, even if the sermon is going on, you're going to go ahead and you're going to start that prayer anyways. The other scholars, most of the other scholars, they said no, you're not supposed to do that. In fact, it's disliked to even pray. You walk in and you sit down immediately and you start listening to the sermon. So the reason why I really prefer this opinion is because I know the amount of concentration that people can have during a prayer while the sermon is going on. It's going to really, really impair their concentration. So the prayer is usually one of the weakest prayers that they've ever performed, because they're trying to, especially if they're trying to listen to the sermon and they hear something interesting, they're completely distracted, and you're not supposed to be praying while you're being distracted. So that's one of the reasons why I really feel that this opinion is it's better to be practiced. Otherwise, the value of your prayer is generally not going to be at the same level. So that's something to keep in mind. But of course, keep in mind there is a difference of opinion. So there is some people are very strong about the other opinion as well. And if you walk into a masjid and you sit down, they may even look at you and like, what the heck is this guy doing? They can't talk to you though, right? Because the sermon's going on. But they're looking at you and they're like, why is this person coming and just sit down? Right? So this guy doesn't know. This guy doesn't know what the Imam Shafi'i's opinion was. Right? But he knows the other scholar's opinion. So we're taking that opinion in this class. So I'm very rarely do I have a strong stance on some opinions, but here I have a very strong stance for the purpose of concentration only. Okay. Prayer when you're injured or ill. We have that today too. Okay. Prayer when you're injured. So if you're injured, you're seriously injured, you're not able to stand up, you're allowed to sit down and perform your prayer, but you have to make sure that you're doing your bowing and your prostration fully. So what does that mean exactly? That means is if you're injured, okay, let's say you have some injury, you're going to be sitting on a chair or you're going to be sitting on the floor, right? But if the injury is restricted such that you can only not stand, standing is the only problem, but you can actually get up from your chair and you could go straight into bowing position. If you're able to do that, you have to do full bowing position. If you're able to go on the floor and perform prostration, you have to get on the floor and you have to perform prostration. So this is, I think, is very rare though, right? Because usually when people have some problem where they can't stand, usually they can't bow either, because bowing requires some type of standing, half standing or something. But in case there's a problem with only you standing, you have to do everything but the standing part, right? So just keep that in mind. But usually if you're not even able to fully bow, you can't do the ruku', you can't do the prostration or the sajda correctly or fully, because you have some injury, your back is hurting, you have this problem or whatever it is, then you don't even you don't need to stand, and you perform the bowing and the prostration through gestures. So how does that work? So literally, let me show you what that's like. So you're sitting on a chair, right? So when you're sitting on a chair, you're praying. Oh, let's say you can stand. Let's say you can't stand, you can't perform it. If you're sitting and doing your prayer, you're going to make a gesture for bowing like this, right? And you're going to make a gesture for prostration like this, you know? Or you could go like this, or you could go like this, either one, as long as the prostration gesture is lower than the bowing. So you just make sure that you bend more when it comes to the prostration, because obviously you're supposed to be lower in that position. Okay, so here's the little caveat. So if you're unable to bow, if you read this text very carefully, there's some little hidden things in there. If you're unable to bow or prostrate, you're not able to bow or prostrate fully, then you don't even need to stand. So what that means is that if you have a problem with going down on the floor and you can't bow or prostrate, and you say, but I can stand, so I'm going to stand for most of my prayer, and then I'm going to go ahead and do my other things on the chair and do my other motions. You don't have to. You can, but you're not required to do that. Okay? You could do that through gestures. Now remember, you must bow down lower when you're doing the prostration gesture. So that's a requirement. It has to be lower. If you can't even sit down, okay, you can't even sit down and you have an injury, you're allowed to lie down and pray with gestures. Right? So while you're lying down, how do you lie down? How do you pray with gestures? You have two options. Either you lie on your back, right, and your feet are going to be facing the Qibla, facing the direction of the Kaaba, which means that, you know, if you have a pillow, let's say you're in a hospital bed, may Allah protect us, but you're on a hospital bed, you put a pillow up, if your feet are facing the Qibla, your face is actually somewhat towards the Qibla as well, right? So one way is to lie on your back, and your face is towards the direction of the Qibla, kind of, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to pray with gestures. So you're going to be holding your hands like this while you're lying down, and you're going to maybe move your head like this for bowing, and then you come back up, and then you move your head a little bit lower for prostration, and that's it, while you're lying on a bed. So you can do that. All right? If you have, if you do whatever you can. If you can barely even move your neck, you can't move your neck much, you can just move your neck a little bit like this, and you can just do gestures as much as you can. That's one option. The second option is you lie on your side with your face towards the Qibla. So another way is you lie on your side, on your right side, and you're going to be looking towards the Qibla this way. So whichever one is more convenient for you, whichever one you can do, as long as you're facing the direction of the Qibla, the Kaaba. So prayer remains an obligation as long as you're conscious. As long as you're conscious, you still have to pray. If you can barely move, you just pray through gestures, or you could pray even with your eye movements. You just move your eyes as a movement, and that'll be sufficient. Or even if you can't move your eyes, let's say you're completely paralyzed, you pray in your heart. But if you're totally unconscious, obviously you're not going to be held responsible for praying. That means that that's how important prayer is. Doesn't matter what state you're in, what condition you're in, it's still required for you to continue to pray. And probably in that case, it's more important for you to actually pray. If you find that it's painful you're in a hospital bed or something, it's very painful for someone to move you into the direction of the prayer, into the direction of Makkah. And you know, if they were going to try and help you move, it's really, really painful. You don't want to move. You don't even have to face the direction. You could face any direction that you're already in, and you could pray that way anyways. Whoever is unconscious for 5 prayers or less has to make them up after waking up. So if you got knocked out, you missed 2 prayers, you wake up, you make up those 2 prayers. If you're out for longer than that, you don't need to make up the prayers. So if you go into a coma or something for 3 days, and then you come out of the coma, you don't need to make up those 3 days of prayers, right? But if you just faint or something for like 2 prayers, 3 prayers, you should make them up if it's less than 5. Okay? So that's prayer while ill. Do we have traveling? We have traveling. Okay. Prayer while traveling. So traveling is considered to be a hardship for most people because it's physically exhausting. It also disturbs people's eating patterns, their sleeping patterns. Even though we have such luxurious means of transportation today, especially in the past, traveling used to be really, really tiring. Imagine sitting on a camel or on a donkey or something like that for a long period of time. It's very, very exhausting. Even today, people that sit on airplanes, very exhausting for them. Sitting on a bus, going cross country is very exhausting as well. So it's not that easy. So it disturbs everything in your life. So in order to make life easier, Allah has prescribed special concessions for people who are traveling, and only for people who are traveling. So the concessions that are included, we've already learned some of them so far. So what have we learned so far? When it comes to wiping over socks, what is different about a traveler when you're traveling? 72 hours instead of 24-hour period. Okay. What about well, we didn't talk about Shura. What about the Friday prayer? What's the concession? Yeah, you don't have to pray the Friday prayer. You can pray Zohar prayer instead. You don't have to go and find a masjid if you're traveling. You don't have to, you know, go off your route or something. You can go ahead and pray Zohar prayer. So the other things we didn't talk about, we're going to talk about shortening prayers right now. You can actually shorten your prayers while you're traveling. And when we talk about fasting, you can actually skip your fasting and postpone your fast in the month of Ramadan when you're traveling. So there's a lot of concessions that a traveler will get to make their life a little bit easier because there's a difficulty involved, and Allah does not want people to undergo unnecessary difficulty. That's not the purpose of Islam. So to make life easier for us, we're allowed to relax some things, right? So what do we get? Shortening prayer while traveling. So when you are classified as being a traveler, right, all your 4-unit prayers are reduced to 2-unit prayers. Okay, so how many 4-unit prayers do we have? We have 3. Zohar. What else? Asr. And Isha. So we have 3 4-unit prayers. Those 3 4-unit prayers are shortened from being 4 units to 2 units when you're traveling. So you start praying 2 instead of you praying 4. What about Fajr prayer? It's 2. Do we cut it in half and make it 1? No. We don't. So we leave it at 2. What about the Maghrib prayer? Do we make it 1.5? No, we don't make it 1.5. You can't have a half-unit prayer, right? So you leave it at 3. Yeah, that would be interesting. So let's see. So this makes it easier for you to finish your prayers, even though you're not neglecting your prayers. So you're still praying to Allah, a little bit easier for you. Now, when you make the intention to start traveling, what you're going to do is you're going to begin by shortening your prayers as soon as you leave your city. So while you're going on a journey, you're traveling to some, far off place, you're about to leave on a journey, right? As soon as you make the intention to travel, and you're setting out, you start shortening your prayers as soon as you leave your city. So what does that mean? That means that you're planning on traveling to China. You're about to board an airplane, right? You need to drive to the airport. Okay? Now, the airport is like 40 minutes from your house, driving time. Okay? It's like, let's say it's about 40 miles away from your house. So once you pack up your bags, you put your bags in the car, stuff, and you decide, you know what? Can I start shortening my prayer right now, even though I'm not actually traveling yet, I'm at home. No, you can't. You can't start shortening because you have not started your journey yet. So, okay, I've not started my journey because I'm still at home. So now you start your journey and you start traveling and you make it to the airport. While you're at the airport is only 40 miles from your house. If you were to drive to the airport just because if you were to drive to the airport to pick up your in-laws, are you considered a traveler? No, airports, you're not traveling to the airport. You're driving to the airport. It's not that far from you. So since you've not technically traveled very far, but you're at the airport, you're not really that far, on your journey, are you allowed to start? And the answer is yes. If you have the intention of traveling to China, for example, because you're intending to have a long distance you're going to be traveling, you've started on your journey. As long as you've started on your journey and you've crossed your own city, your journey has begun. If you decide all of a sudden, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start our journey, and you leave your house and you go to the nearest gas station, which is down the street. And you say, well, technically we've started our journey, right? So let's go ahead and pray at the gas station and we're going to shorten our prayers. You can't do that. Why? Because you're literally next door. You could just go back home, enjoy the convenience of your own home. You've not really started your journey yet. So it's considered that you started your journey once you bypass your own city that you live in. Once you cross your own city and you're on your way for a long journey, you're considered a traveler from that moment on, and you can start. So if you need to get gas on the way and you've already been driving for 20-30 minutes, you can go ahead and start shortening your prayers at that gas station or wherever it is. Okay? So this concession, this reduction of prayer going from 4 to 2, it will last until you return to your city, until you come back to your city. So when you're on your way back home, if you enter into your city and then you stop by the masjid of your local city, right, and your home is like 10-20 minutes away, and you walk into the masjid and you say, well, technically we've not returned home yet because we stopped by the masjid to pray. Do you shorten your prayers? No, because you're back in your city. Right, so technically you return home. So your home is your city right now. So you're back home, you don't shorten your prayers. And this is a very common thing that people do. So they come and they delay and they delay and they delay their prayer, and then they come back and they're right about to arrive at home. So before we arrive at home, let's just stop by somewhere and pray on the way so that we can get the prayers a little bit shorter or something. That's not a good practice to have. So this lasts until you come back to your city, or until you enter an area, a destination where you plan on staying there for a significant amount of time. You plan on remaining there. So let's say, for example, you're going to China, but you have a stopover in London, and you're going to be chilling out in London for a few weeks, but your ultimate destination is China. So if you're sitting there in London, technically you're not a traveler anymore, right? Because you're staying there for quite a while. You have you're going to be having a place to stay. You're going to be having all these things. So in that case, you're not really considered a traveler. So how many days do you have to stay in a place in order for you to be considered a resident now, and you're not a traveler? So there's a difference between a resident and a traveler. So how many days do you actually need to have the intention of staying in a place? Well, scholars have differed. And there's not so much clear cut. So the estimation is somewhere between 4 and 20 days. Between 4, if you intend to stay between 4 and 20 days in one place, then that's when you become a person who's not a traveler anymore. So you don't shorten prayers anymore. Okay? Now, what should you do if I'm not telling you which opinion to follow? So really, I think the best thing is the traveler needs to decide which range to go with, based on how much hardship is really involved in their travel. So, like for me, for example, to be honest with you, when I travel, cross country or something like that, if I stop 1 day or 2 days and I have a nice hotel or something, I consider myself, I'm in comfort and I'm in luxury, and I can go ahead and don't need to shorten my prayers. But especially while I'm on the way, I'm traveling, I'm in the airport or something like that, that's definitely in the middle of travel, you shorten your prayers. So you have to make that decision yourself. And it's recommended to not set this limit greater than 15 days, because that's the Hanafi school's opinion, which is actually the most liberal of all the four schools on this issue. So try to stick between 4 to 15 days. That's my advice. Try not to stay more than 15 days. So if you're going to be staying in a place for that period of time, you go ahead and you make the intention for that. Right? If you're unsure of how long you're going to be staying, and you predict that you might leave any day, you can keep on shortening your prayer even if it lasts for a few months. So you're stuck in London, and there's no airplane back to your hometown, and you're waiting, and you say, you know what, maybe tomorrow's the next flight. You go ahead and shorten. Then the next day, you didn't get the flight. You said, maybe tomorrow's the next day. And tomorrow's might be the next flight. And you don't get your flight. And you keep on shortening and shortening for an entire month. Technically, you were staying, but you had this uncertainty. You didn't know that you were going to stay that long. So you can keep on shortening for as long as you need to if you don't know how long you're actually going to be staying. And it's not, the circumstance is not in your hands. You know. All right. If a traveler, a person who's traveling, is praying behind an imam who's a resident, meaning the imam is not traveling, right? What's going to happen? You're supposed to be praying 2 for Zohar, right? Let's say you're praying Zohar, you're a traveler, you just travel to China, and the imam in China of the masjid, you go to the masjid and you're going for Zohar prayer. The imam is going to pray how many units? 4. And you're supposed to pray how many units by yourself? 2. So if you're praying behind the imam, what do? You pray 4 and you follow the imam. You don't just stop after 2. You go ahead and you make the intention, you're following the imam, you're going to pray 4 units now, even though you were supposed to pray 2. If the imam is a traveler, so you go to China, and the imam is so nice, or the imam didn't show up that day or something, and you're asked to lead the prayer. You're a traveler, you're supposed to pray how many for Zohar prayer? 2. So you're leading the prayer, but the Chinese Muslims of that masjid are supposed to pray how many? 4. Now what do? So you're leading the prayer, they come in, they're praying behind you, you're still going to pray 2, because you're supposed to pray 2. So you pray 2 and you finish your prayer. And what they're going to do is they're going to stand up and they're going to make up 2 more, because they're supposed to be praying 4. And now you already know how to make up those 2 extra units. So that's it. That's the way it works. It's recommended that the imam make an announcement that they are a traveler before the prayer and after the prayer, so that no one gets confused. And this is very important practice. So this will distinguish a CIS student from a non-CIS student. You should be very careful. So if you're going to be leading a prayer, make sure that you make an announcement before the prayer, so that people know, right, that you're out of town, you're a traveler, and you're going to be praying 2, so that they know what's going on, so they don't get confused, right? And after the prayer is done, you also make an announcement, and you do it immediately. Huh? You don't say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then you start doing your zikr, and then afterwards, oh, by the way, guys, I just want to let you know that I was a traveler. Let them know immediately. So the moment you're done, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, you turn around and you tell the people, I'm a traveler, so complete your prayers. Whoever's not a traveler, please stand up and complete your prayers, because I'm traveling. And the reason why that is, you say, well, wait a minute, if you already made the announcement in the beginning, why make the announcement in the end again? Some people join late. And if they join late, they're going to be confused, because if they join late and they pray 1 unit of prayer with you, they're going to be wondering what's going on, right? When you finish, they're like, what's happening? So it's very important for you to do that. All right? And it's recommended, but it's highly recommended. If you miss a prayer while you're traveling, what do? It's considered to be like a debt. So in a debt, what do? You make up the debt the way that it was due. Right? There's no interest and there's no reduction in the debt. So that means that you make it up as 2 units even if you come back home. So you were traveling, you missed Asr prayer, and you come back home, it's Maghrib time, right? And now you've returned back. You need to make up your Asr prayer. But you're home now, so you're not traveling. So do you pray 2 or you pray 4? 2. Because you owed 2 units of prayer, and there's no increase or decrease, no interest and no discount. So whatever you owed Allah at that time, you owed Him 2 units of prayer, you're going to still use 2 units of prayer. If you missed a prayer while you were at home, you missed Zohar prayer And then you go on a journey, you start traveling, and now it's Asr time. And you say, well, I'm going to pray Asr 2 units, but I need to make up my Zohar prayer first. How many units of Zohar are you going to pray? 4, exactly. Right? There's no discount on that. Right? So you're going to go ahead and pray it that way. What is the minimum distance for traveling? So how do you define what a journey is? All right, so this has been a lot of debate in books of Islamic law among scholars and everything. And I think the opinion that I've taken in this class is that there's no specific definition of what a journey is. There's no specific mileage or specific anything. You have to decide and judge what you consider a journey or a traveling is according to the mode of transportation, according to the difficulty you're going to undergo, and according to the circumstances you're in. And this is actually the opinion of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah and some other scholars as well. So scholars have tried to set certain limits just to make life easier for people so they don't have to really think about it. But the problem with that is that the means of transportation have changed in the last century drastically. We have airplanes and we have cars now, which go way faster than anything has ever been in the past. And there's so many variables to consider, right, when you're traveling. The variable is a plane. If you travel by a plane, you travel by a ship, you travel by a car, that all makes a difference in how much difficulty you're going to experience. If you're traveling in traffic compared to no traffic, that's going to make a world of difference. Like LA traffic is very interesting, right? So it's going to make a world of difference on how much difficulty, whether you're going to pull off the freeway, you're not going to pull off the freeway. So it's best, I recommend nowadays, it's not set restrictions, but let people try to determine whether they're traveling or not. So how do you figure it out? Here's a good way to determine if you're traveling, right? So you have to figure out, am I classified according to common sense as being a traveler or not? So I gave you the example. If you drive to the airport to pick up your friends, right? Do you say, well, I'm going on a journey to pick up, I'm going on a journey to the airport to pick up my relatives and then I'm returning back from a journey. You don't say it's a journey, right? So here are some following things. So if most of these apply, then you're probably considered a traveler. Not all of them, not just one of them, most of them apply. Number one, you've traveled at least 50 miles one way. Okay, so you travel one way 50 miles. Number two, you would actually describe yourself to someone else when you're talking to them that you're traveling. So for example, when you tell someone, well, I work 80 miles away. Your job is 80 miles, and there are many people who actually work 80 miles. And they drive every day 80 miles one way, 80 miles back. So when you're going, you're telling someone, you say, oh, well, you actually drive that many miles? Yeah. I go on a journey of 80 miles and I return back home from my journey. You wouldn't say that. You say, I commute 80 miles to work and I commute back. You don't describe that situation as I'm setting out on a journey, right? So that's second way. Number three, you're going to pack your bags, some supplies for the journey ahead of you. If you're driving 80 miles to work, you don't pack your, suitcase or something like that, and I need a pair of clothes and everything, so you're not traveling. You let your neighbors generally know that you're going on a journey. You say, I'm leaving for a while. You don't say, oh, I'm leaving, by the way, for work this morning. It's 80 miles. I want to let you know. I'll be back. Please take care of my plants and, make sure everything's fine. And you've left your city or your county of residence, and you've crossed into another city or another county. Right, so you have to make sure that because sometimes, there's so many, let's say you're stuck in traffic. It can take you sometimes 3 hours to get to one location. But you're literally in the same county. You haven't even really crossed county lines. There's so much traffic. You're not really considered a traveler. Traffic is horrible, but you're not traveling really. So it takes a lot of time, or you traverse a lot of miles, but you're not really traveling. So here are some guidelines. And at the end of the day, you got to figure out whether you're considered a traveler or not. And if you're in doubt, it's always better to err on the side of you consider yourself traveling or not traveling. Not traveling, which is very similar. If you're confused about another issue, you err on the side of when it comes to menstruation. When we're deciding whether you're in menstruation or it's abnormal bleeding, it's better to err on the side of which one? But which one leads you to pray? Abnormal. You say it's abnormal bleeding. So it's better to err on the side of saying this is abnormal bleeding, and you go ahead and you pray. All right. What about air travel? Is that here too? Yeah. So mashallah, we got a lot to cover. So air travel. When you're traveling on an airplane, or even on a train, for example, it's better to delay the prayer if you're going to reach your destination before the time of prayer is over. So that's what's recommended. So you have a 1-hour flight, and you know you're going to reach in time. It's better not to pray on the airplane. When you arrive, you can pray in the airport, and you're going to be fine. It's better not to pray on an airplane when the time of prayer is still going to be there. If it's a short flight. Okay, but there's a few factors which may dictate concessions. So if you have to pray because you can't fit it in that time, what do? Well, number one, you have 3 issues that you need to deal with when you're traveling on an airplane. Number one, you need to figure out where you're going to pray. There's no space on the airplane. Number 2, you have to determine the right direction of the qibla. And number 3, you have to calculate the timing for the prayer. So how do you deal with these 3 variables? So there's 3 things you need to figure out. Finding space to pray. If there's not enough space to perform the prayer, or if you're not allowed to stand in those areas. Right? And usually, if it's a small plane or normal plane, you're not actually allowed to be standing in the aisleways and walkways and stuff like that. Then in that case, you should pray in your seat, and you should gesture for bowing and prostration just like an injured person. You stay in your seat and you make the gestures like we talked about. Determining the right direction. So if you do have space to bow and to prostrate, like for example, you have a masjid on the plane, or you're in first class, or you're the pilot's friend, or whatever it is, right? You have space, then you actually have to try to determine the direction of prayer. The question is why? If you're sitting down in your seat, why don't you have to determine the direction of prayer? Because you can't move, right? So you can't pray sideways in your chair. So let's say the direction of prayer was this, and you figured out it was this way. Especially in economy, you're not going to be able to like sit like this and you really make your prayer much, right? So you're not burdened with trying to figure out like you're a little bit this way, a little bit that way. You can scoot a little bit, but you don't have to do that. So, but if you have space, you got to try to determine the direction of prayer. And how could you do that? You ask a flight attendant, and usually the flight attendant, I'll tell you from experience, says, I have no idea. So then you say, can you please ask the pilot, because the pilot better know what direction we're going in, otherwise we're in big trouble, right? So they can go ahead and ask the pilot and figure out what direction you're in. Or if you're on one of those, if you ever flown, let me think, what is it? Emirates, Virgin Atlantic TV screens, and one of the channels shows you the direction you're traveling in. So that makes your life a lot easier. Or other ones which have the in-flight entertainment system. So you figure out what the direction is, and you go ahead and you face that direction and you pray in that direction. Assuming that if you're in an airplane is not going to be making very sharp turns. So you go ahead and you pray in that direction. If you're on a boat, the boat is going to be moving around and making turns. If you know that the boat is turning around in different ways, you're actually going to be moving with the direction, if you know the direction of the prayer. So let's say, for example, you're on a boat and the boat is taking off. Hypothetically, it's a rare situation, but you're going, and you know that you're supposed to be praying the direction of Qibla happens to be towards the land. And all of a sudden, the boat starts moving this way, and you see the land moving. So you're actually going to be moving in the direction, other direction, and adjusting according to the Qibla, if you can. If you can. If there's no space, you can just go ahead and pray in any direction that your seat happens to be facing, because you can't turn around at that time. Okay. Now, how do you calculate the time for prayer? So this is actually the real tricky part. How do you calculate the time for prayer? Well, to be honest, it's not that difficult to determine 3 of the prayers. And that is, the Fajr prayer, you can kind of figure it out just by looking out the window. All right? The Maghrib prayer, you can figure it out by looking out the window. And the Isha prayer, you can figure out by looking out the window. So what do you look for in Fajr prayer? Yeah, but you're not going to be able to see the little thread of light when you're in the sky. What would you be seeing generally? If you see the sun, you miss Fajr prayer. Right? So what should you be looking for? You look for any faint traces of light. Right? You look for any type of faint traces of light, but not sunrise after post-sunrise light. Like the darkness is starting to go away and lighten up. That's where your Fajr prayer, right? So you can figure that out. You just spend one day without traveling, and you watch the whole Fajr time, and you'll get it. You'll say, okay, that's what I'm supposed to look for. And then when the sunrise comes, you say, oh, that's what the sky looks like when the sun is risen. When there's actually sunrise, you know exactly what to look for. You just do it one day as an experiment, and you'll figure it out. Maghrib prayer, what do you look for? You look for, but you're not going to see the sun setting from your window, right, or something like that. What are you actually going to be looking for? You're looking for the colors, the shades. So you're going to be seeing red, so that you know the sun is probably set, and it's starting to become red, and the white glow is starting to come. That's when you know Maghrib time has come in. And then Isha prayer, what do you look for? You just look for darkness, right? So when it's dark, it's Isha time. You got that part down. The difficult thing is figuring out the Zuhr prayer and the Asr prayer, right? So how would you figure that out? Well, there's a few ways. Either you could ask the flight attendant to check for you what time zone you're in, and you could look up the prayer times for that region. Or you could actually look at your little map and figure out which region are you in, and figure it out. There's a Malaysian company that actually did something really cool. There's a website there where you put in your flight number, and they already have all the flights calculated for you. You put your flight number in, and they already know where you're going to be at what time, and they give you a list of prayer times. You can print it out and take it with you and say, this is on your watch, your port of, what do you call it? Not destination, your port of departure, yeah. Your departure location, it'll tell you, according to your clock, this time to this time is the Zuhr prayer when you're going to be over this region, and this time to this time is this prayer when you're going to be over this region. It's amazing, mashallah. So I think they're developing an app right now. Once that gets, on its ground, it's going to solve the problem for everyone. You won't need to worry about that. And while you're waiting for them, if they haven't done it properly yet, this is a great app idea. If you do this app, I guarantee I'll pay $1. I'll pay $5 for this app. So if you develop the app, I guarantee you I can convince at least another 500 people or so to pay. So you just made $2,500 if you develop the app, inshallah. So if you guys should consider doing something like that. So it would be really awesome. Even if you just calculate, even if you just put a port of destination, port of departure and destination, and you put the hours of how many your flight, because every flight ticket tells you that. And you figure out the flight route, and you just give them the approximate times, this would be an amazing service. And the thing is, it's not difficult. Like, this is difficult to ask the flight attendant and figure it out and all that. I have a feeling that within 5 years, when this app becomes popular, this is going to be like, why didn't we have this 10 years ago? Why did the Muslims take so long to develop this? It's like Zabiha.com and these apps, right? You don't have any problem finding a halal restaurant anywhere now, because it's a piece of cake now. So we're a little bit late in this. We should have developed this literally a few years ago, and we're still kind of behind. So if you know some programmers, you get them, cracking. Otherwise, we just gotta wait for the Malaysians to do the job for us, right? So, so that's that. So Zuhr and Asr can be a little bit tricky, but here's another thing to make your life easier. So you're actually allowed to combine prayers when you're traveling as well. Okay? So of course, it's always recommended to pray every single prayer on time. But when you're traveling and you're actually facing a little bit more difficulty, when you're traveling, you can combine two prayers. You can combine the Zuhr and the Asr prayers, and you can combine the Maghrib and the Isha prayers. So what does it mean to combine them? It means to pray them back to back in the same prayer time. Okay, in the same prayer time. So you're praying them together in either one of their times. So you take the Zuhr and the Asr prayer, and you can pray it in the prayer timing of Zuhr, or you could pray it in the prayer time of Asr. So that means you're actually praying Asr early if you combine it in the time with Zuhr. And if you combine it with Asr, you're actually praying the Zuhr prayer late. But it's not sinful, because you're allowed to do this only when you're on a journey, and it's recommended that you only do it when it's a little bit difficulty involved in it. Not just normal travel, but a little bit more difficulty. But remember one thing, you have to have the intention to combine before the time of Zuhr is finished. That's really important. So you shouldn't be negligent and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna pray, I'm not gonna combine. I'm gonna pray Zuhr as 2 units and I'm gonna pray Asr as 2 units. And then the time is going, you went and had some lunch with your friends, and you totally forgot, and you looked, oh man, it's Asr time, we totally forgot the prayer. Oh, don't worry, I'm a traveler, so I'm gonna go ahead and combine the 2 prayers together. But you didn't have the intention to do that before the time elapsed. So you actually neglected your prayer. So that's something that you should make sure you have the intention to do. Otherwise, that's very common for people. They get very lazy when it comes to traveling. They're, oh, I can always combine my prayer. It's not a big deal. It's not a good habit. You need to have the intention first. And you can also combine the Maghrib and the Isha prayers. And you could do it in either of their times. So you could pray Maghrib and Isha together in Maghrib time, or you could pray Maghrib and Isha together in the Isha time. So, and there should not be a long gap between these 2 prayers when you're combining. You should pray them like back to back. Right? So you don't pray one and then 1 hour later you pray the other one, but it's in the same time. So you should pray them together. Now, if you avail of this, it solves your airplane problem of determining the prayers of time. Right? If you can't figure out the prayer timings and you're on a long flight, you're on a 12-hour flight, you're on an 18-hour flight, and you say, well, how am I going to figure out what the Zuhr time is? And you can just, all you need to do is you figure out post-afternoon, you figure out, you know what, we're probably in the afternoon time. The noon time is past probably. It looks like it based on all my calculation, approximate and everything. I can go ahead and combine the 2 prayers at that time. Combine the Maghrib and Isha prayer, you get some sleep. Fajr, you just got to make sure you wake up for Fajr prayer, and you got to calculate the Fajr prayer. It's a little bit tricky, but you try and calculate anyways. Right, so that helps you. My general advice, or my personal practice, is that I combine prayers when traveling when there's actual difficulty involved, like actual difficulty. So we're traveling, for example, and we're on a bus, and we don't want the bus to stop again, and we want to, keep on traveling and going. We're going to go ahead and do the combining the prayers. Once you arrive in a hotel room or you're at a conference or something like that, what I do is I go ahead and shorten the prayers, but not combine the prayers. Okay, and this I think is a good practice. Interestingly, I actually got this practice from Sheikh Yasir Qadi, who's a very prominent figure in America, and I think it's a very good opinion. It's a very balanced stance, and it's actually the opinion of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah as well. All right. Do we have more today? Nope. Okay, so we're done.